Hi everybody, in this video I'm sharing with you some very important and crucial to understand differences when you're using high quality SCART RGB cable with a PVM compared to consumer CRT. Some of the reasons that people prefer using the less quality cable, composite for example, is that they want the natural dithering to occur that helps create new colors, blur jagged edges, help with creating transparency, smooth out gradient, just give the game a very organic, beautiful textured look. Aside from that many of the games that developed back then were developed with that in mind. Usually when people talk about that, they bring Sony the Hedgehog, the Waterfall section, where you can actually see that if you blur it out, it looks really beautiful and natural and kind of gives you this feeling of water flowing. But without it, it looks kind of very massive with all these sharp lines all over the place. But there is even more to it, and I'm going to show you examples on a PVM and on CRT, no shaders here, so you can see exactly how it looks. I'll be using the amazing Retrogaming cables Universal, Super Nintendo Universal cable. I actually made a full video on my channel about this cable, you want to check it out. But this is arguably the best SCART RGB cable for the NES and the Super Famicom. Now before I want to show you the actual footage, new footage that I wanted to show you and talk more about that, let's take a look at composite versus SCART RGB. Keep in mind, result may vary, and maybe if you use even a better composite cable, you might get better results. And ignore the line artifacts here, this is just due to the recording. So first of all, you can clearly see the differences. The colors, the contrasts are significantly better on the SCART RGB. Also, everything looks much sharper, I mean, as expected. But at the same time, if you look at the building, for example, the gradient on the building, if you look at the plants, if you look at the grass, if you look at the character itself, if you look at the hearts, the highlights of the hearts, and even the pots there at the bottom, it looks kind of more rounded, like the shadowy effect that you can see on the SCART RGB. The weapon, the handle of the weapon looks kind of thick, but it looks slimmer. On the composite. Even the colors blend kind of beautifully, where it's pretty harsh on the SCART RGB. The gradient on the blocks of the building with the wood looks kind of more unified, continuous. Same go to the bush and the highlights of the heart. It looks more intentional that it was designed how it looks on the composite than the SCART RGB. Although because of the low contrast with the character is kind of blend too much into the environment, which actually annoys me and actually causes eye fatigue for me. And I really like how the color pop on the left. So in general, there are other things, of course, I'm going to mention also in a moment more, but there are definitely pros and cons to each one. For me, when I look at a SCART RGB with a consumer CRT, it kind of holds a middle ground that is satisfying in different aspects while solving some of the issues that, well, for me personally can be pretty annoying. Like I told you with the contrast, it can actually be very eye fatiguing. I couldn't even play this game for so long. Of course, it's also game dependent, but I really like the overall sacrifice that I'm actually making to get a better experience in other ways with the SCART RGB. Now, of course, can be very subjective, depends, of course, on the game, on your preferences. Now, let's move to a PVM. Now, before we move on, I want to mention that I'm using this particular cable from Retrogaming Cables.co UK, the Universal Nintendo RGB SCART cable powered by RetroTink. And I'll be using it with my Super Famicom One Chip 02 revision from Japan, which is known for its very high video quality signal output. Alright, Super Mario Kart Japanese cartridge. You can see on the left the Sony PVM. I wrote the exact model at the bottom, and a Sony Consumer CRT on the right. So I'm going to pause a certain moment so you can clearly understand what I'm talking about. So definitely when you look at them side by side, you can see it clearer in a moment. You'll be able to see this is again also kind of 3D, so you can see the jagged edges. This is the reason why I actually chose it. So straight away you can actually see things very clearly. You can see that in terms of sharpness, the PVM is much sharper. If you look at Bowser's at the back, you can see that how beautiful it actually looks on the CRT because it blends the color together beautifully. It actually even creates depth. You can see it more three-dimensional. It doesn't look flat. Even tiny dots area there, again, I'm using here SCART RGB for both. With composite, it's going to be even more blurrier. But it looks kind of like humps, right? Whether on the left side, kind of look flat. Same goes to the orange, they look kind of three-dimensional. The entire character looks like kind of a 3D. You see the depth, you see the space. It's a more three-dimensional game. Even if you look at the heels, or even if the character, there's a shell of depth of field effect when they're further away, which naturally occurs because of the blurry when, of course, because of the less of details, because we are dealing with 600 versus 350 TVL. So look at the heels at the back, for example. On the PVM, it looks all of it just super sharp. where on the consumer CRT, they play with less detail and more detail to create this kind of bokeh effect. This is naturally occurs because how they program, of course, the textures themselves and how it looks on consumer CRTs. The hills look kind of a more blurry further away. The trees, less, but again, still blurry. Same goes to the riders. The further away they are, the more blurry they look because there's less detail there. And to everything further away, even the marks, the red marks, for example, on the curve, they're going to be sharper the closer they are to you, and more blurry the less detail there is the further away. Well, it's not further away, but again, it is further away when you actually perceive it, but the smaller the details are. So if you want to be sharper, you create something larger like the trees, right? And you create this beautiful effect. But on the PVM, it's basically non-existent. It's like having an aperture number of 22 and everything just looks sharp in the image. So pay attention carefully now with the heels. Look at the heels on the right. You're going to see it in a moment. Look at them. How it's actually, and this parallax effect, how beautiful it is on the CRT compared to the PVM. Now pay attention to the heel on the right. You can see there it's supposed to be kind of a sun, the effect of the sun, but on the right it looks very natural, the way the rays of the sun actually hit the brighter heel there. But if you look on the left, it looks kind of lines that just cover the heel, very visible kind of lines just goes from just curved around the heel. It feels like a glow. It feels like you feel the warmth of the environment. It's so immersive. But on the PVM, it's just totally flat. And again, if you look at the grass, they put more details there compared to the heel. And then when it looks more blurry, the heels look more blurry, and the parallax effect looks much more convincing because the detail in the grass, there's more detail in the grass and also, by the way, on the sand. So it creates this beautiful effect, this bokeh effect. It looks incredible. And this exactly shows the separation between the technology and the code and how it was actually designed to work in tandem to create this effect. Otherwise, you won't be able to see it. Of course, it's not for every game, but here this is a great example of what I'm trying to demonstrate. And even in 2D games, especially if you have a parallax effect, it's also designed as well to give more depth and create this effect more prominent if you use a consumer CRT compared to a professional CRT. Here, look at the shadows on the left, for example, of the cloud. Look how it actually blends better with the road compared to on the left. It just look kind of like circular spot. But if you're going to use Composite, for example, it's going to blend much better because it look more blurrier. The same goes to the UI, how it's actually blend naturally with everything else. You just have this cohesive look. It doesn't look like you put different stickers on a board and move them. It feels more you are actually within an environment. It's actually feels like it has volume rather than looking on just something totally flat. It gives the game kind of an extra dimensionality. Therefore, it also becomes, again, this I can say from my experience, much more immersive. It also increased, by the way, the realism to a certain degree, like I mentioned, for example, with the rays of light of the sun, the volumetric feeling that the game has, or you feel that it has. Now you're going to see some aberrations here. Moire, for example, because of the recording, it's not actually as it is on the CRT. It's actually look clean. But when I mention, it feels kind of more organic, like you have this texture. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The PVM, although again it's not as extreme as BVMs, it feels much more digitized, closer to what we feel when you actually play a game like on an LCD. Without shaders or anything. And in many games, there are some games like this kind of shadowy figure, but if you play on PVM, it's not shadowy. It looks like something that is quite recognizable, kind of mishmash of pixels. Now there are the gap between the scanlines, of course, that are more visible on the PVM compared to the CRT. Now the PVMs do excel when it comes to geometry, convergence, and linearity. So they're representing shapes accurately. Circles look circular and straight lines look straight. But when it comes to jagged edges, it can be pretty messy, as you can see here. On the CRT, it looks better, but still, again, not great. But if you use, for example, Composite, it's going to smoothen it out even more. This is why for certain, maybe PlayStation 1 games, 3D games, it's not going to be a good choice. Although you do get on the PVM lots of ways to actually control the image. I'm still, by the way, trying to figure out everything. It will take me time, so I won't comment on that. Now the bloom is way more controlled, but it's still there, and it actually helps a bit with the dithering. And motion clarity, of course, is excellent on both. But just be aware that on PVM you get significantly less breathing bloom. And it's also kind of dancing less. This is because of the cheaper voltage regulation that we have on consumer CRTs, where PVM are built with superior high voltage regulation, so the image generally stays rock solid and doesn't warp or change size during bright scenes. And there are many other effects, depends on the game, and depends, again, for some games of course you might prefer playing on a PVM, but I wanted to show you that there are differences and they are very significant. You cannot ignore them unless you choose to ignore them deliberately. And for some games, the PVM is going to be the ultimate choice over consumer CRTs. That's why when I mentioned that the consumer CRT with the RGB SCART, it kind of gets me this middle ground so I can enjoy many of the advantages of both. Because what you've seen here is the SCART RGB with the consumer CRT on the right and with the PVM. If you have anything to add in the comment section below, I really wanted to highlight this because this is very important, especially when you're making decisions buying cables or different CRT, professional versus consumer. So I hope this one just give you an extra information to help you make a smarter buying decision for yourself. Thanks for watching.